All right, we're recording.
I think you can now see why I'm actually a piano player, not a guitar player. That was pretty poor air guitar on my part.
Well, I thought it was a rather fitting song, some Tenacious D metal, given that this is our topic of today. So thank you for being here, and I'll just kick us off. Hello, I'm Nick Huzar. I'm also the host of Stuff TV and the founder of OfferUp, the largest local marketplace in the U.S. And when I started this company, I watched literally billions of dollars worth of secondhand goods exchange hands like every single month. And I started to think a lot about my own existence and how I'm impacting the planet. And I just became really curious, scoured the internet constantly, and I found it really hard to find answers. So I decided to do something about it and started Stuff TV to talk to amazing thought leaders to help enlighten us and just give us some more perspective on these things. So today I'm excited to have Ryan Glant to talk about all things metal. And Ryan runs Pacific Iron and Metal, which is a 100-year-old recycling company here in Seattle. So thank you, Ryan, for being here, and thanks for air guitaring with me. And love to just maybe hand it over to you and just maybe tell us a little bit about your background. And don't forget to tell us, to add that little tidbit of what you did before you got into metal. I thought that was a good one, too.
I will be happy to. Well, thanks for boosting my ego, calling me an amazing thought leader. I don't get that at home or at work very often, so appreciate that, Nick. Yeah, my background is, it's a family business that I'm running now, but my family gave me the opportunity to go do a bunch of different things before coming and running the business. And so when I was in Nashville, apropos of the air guitar, I was writing music for As the World Turns and The Guiding Light. I had a real passion for music and why I chose to go to Vanderbilt in Nashville in the first place. And following that, I came back to Seattle, which is where I was born and raised and where I live with my family today. I came back, I studied law and practiced law at Perkins Coie and did corporate law for a number of years and was introduced to amazing businesses, both startups and well-established businesses. And it just made me realize how incredibly cool it was that my family had a business that had been around for nearly 100 years at that point. And it got me thinking about what their succession looked like and whether there was a part for me in it. And as it turned out, that timing was great for them. I'm the only member of the fourth generation that's involved with Pacific Iron and Metal and our sister businesses, Seattle Storehouse and Pacific Fabrics. And it's been an amazing experience for the last 10 years to learn the business and become the CEO. And we have had, 106 years of existence, and the last 10 have been pretty exciting. So happy to share with you what I see happening in the world of scrap metal recycling, both now and in the future.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I think maybe before we dig into that, I think at a macro level for anybody that's watching, I always like to talk about how does this impact overall CO2 emissions? So again, globally, there's about 50 billion tons of CO2 that's emitted into the atmosphere, and between 5 and 9% of that actually comes from kind of the overall, steel industry. And I think what's interesting about this industry overall, I think versus plastics, is you can reuse a lot of this stuff, and I think especially aluminum is really interesting. So just something, I guess, for anybody watching that's kind of curious, because you think about it, a lot of things in our lives there's a lot of metals all around us, cars and this chair I'm sitting on and buildings. It's a very abundant and I think, as you know, well-established industry that's been going on for a long, long time now. So it's always interesting to understand what are people doing, kind of out there. So, maybe just rewinding the tape, it'd be helpful to understand, how has your company evolved? Has it always been kind of the same types of, recycling and metals that you've had the whole way, or has it changed over the years?
No, it certainly changed. And I mean, I think the reason that it was, and it's one of the oldest industries, we all know what one of the oldest industries is that we talk about, but this is another very old industry and is allowed.
Soap operas, Guiding Light.
Yeah, exactly. This industry is allowed both in Las Vegas and outside of Las Vegas. So, it was always driven by, it made more sense to reuse things than to go and make things from raw materials, and when that trade-off happens. So our origins were my great grandfather, who was a recent immigrant to the United States, literally going around South Seattle with a horse-drawn carriage and grabbing used rubber, rags, waste paper. It didn't necessarily start with metal. That evolved, and compiling it, consolidating it, cleaning it when necessary, and finding people that could reuse it for its same purpose, and do so, economically efficiently. And so that's the origin of our business. That's the origin of a lot of our industry. And amazingly, a lot of our industry has this story of third and fourth generation businesses that kind of started when people were just needing to make sense economically of all this product that we were starting to make coming out of the industrial age.
I thought it was fascinating. I thank you for letting me and my son tour through your facility. He got a lot out of that, and plus he got to play hooky from school, so that was always fun. But how do you get all that supply? Like when we walked around, we saw lots of different things, and it looked like they came from many different locations and different companies. Like, do people literally just know about you and they just drop it off, or do you establish relationships there? Or?
So our industry is made up of large metal recycling plant facilities like ours. We're definitely on the larger side, and then there's more mid-sized and smaller scrap facilities that people are probably more accustomed to in their neighborhoods. Or so being that we're a fairly sizable and non-ferrous primarily operation, meaning we deal mostly with copper, aluminum, stainless steel, lead, zinc, that kind of material, less so with bringing in steel. Our suppliers, or what we would call our customers, come from the manufacturing industry, people who are making aerospace parts, maritime boat parts here in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of times we contract and work with utility companies. So imagine your old brass water meters getting pulled out and swapped out for new one, or your electric meters getting swapped out as part of an infrastructure trade out. We can recycle the old material, the old water meter, the old electric meter, the old copper pipes and wiring. And so utility companies, manufacturers, and then of course we're set up at the confluence of I-5 and I-90 to be able to help any mom and pop that are doing a home improvement project, electricians and plumbers that are doing projects on folks' homes. And so that is where the bulk of our material comes from.
What's the hardest thing that you've had to break down? What's the biggest pain in the butt? Like, oh no, we got more of this coming.
For us, the challenges are more so around what's environmentally okay to have in our facility. So we take our environmental stewardship extremely seriously. I myself have been on the board of a local nonprofit called EarthCore. We live and breathe making sure that what we're doing is supporting the environment. And so what happens is manufacturers, often it doesn't always align that the way that you make product is also the safest and most environmentally friendly way to make a product. And so for us, it's more about what is maybe in that product that could be problematic for the stormwater system that we feed into. We are permitted to be able to actually do the work that we do with the county. And so what I think about is more along the lines of when someone sends us something that's going to be full of oil, or, I have to think about, can we accept it? What can we do if we do accept it so that it's not going to make the environmental impact worse than recycling it in the first place?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I remember walking through there, you had all these different types of things. One of the things I thought was really interesting as we dug into some of this was just aluminum and what a great product it actually is. Because one of the stats I think I was looking at was, you save 95% of the energy that it takes to produce new aluminum by reusing it. And I think you can reuse it. Can you use it again and again in perpetuity, or is there finally an end of a life for aluminum?
Yeah, and that's one of the most amazing parts about the non-ferrous metals that we deal with is that they do not have a degradation. They don't lose their chemical properties. So in theory, you can keep recycling them infinitely. And the energy savings often comes from just what it takes to actually pull bauxite or other types of raw materials from the ground. And the mining operations can be extremely damaging to the environment, require a ton of energy. I think another stat that I saw, Nick, was on steel. Of course, we're not doing as much steel recycling, but on steel, there's a savings of energy that would basically power 18 million homes a year in the U.S. just from the steel that's recycled in the United States on an annual basis. Just the energy that is saved from mining for new ore is pretty significant energy savings. So it is something that I don't think we do a good enough job as an industry making people aware just how important metal recycling is to where we are today. Because honestly, as rough as it is, and we all acknowledge there's something afoot with climate change, and we don't like where we're heading, we would probably be in a lot worse shape were this not already taking place to some level with this commodity.
And I'm assuming a lot of the kind of the input you get is local in nature. I'm assuming that's the case. Like, what's the furthest you're usually getting supply from? Probably not too far away, no?
Yeah, no. For us, it's a very localized industry. So it's mostly Western Washington, up and down the I-5 corridor for our operation. We're a single facility. There are a number of folks in the industry who are competitors of ours that have multiple facilities and maybe go further, but they have those multiple facilities because from a transportation cost standpoint, it doesn't make sense to move, the raw material, the scrap too far before it gets consolidated, cleaned. And then what we do on our site is actually take what seems like, junk or garbage to most people, but we actually take it, see it as a raw material and process it into a finished product that will be understood by mills and smelters across the globe as something that they can put into their operation and make brand new metal with. So we are making a product in our facility.
Yeah. Well, going back to kind of the overall CO2 kind of output, if it's already local and you're reusing these things, that's wonderful, right? Because you can take an old building, break it down, and reuse it, maybe make another building locally, or you're not shipping all this heavy metal necessarily across the world. I mean, to some degree, maybe you are, but I think for the most part, it is local, which is good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I would clarify that while our input is definitely local, the output is both an export item. Yeah, we export quite a bit of material. We do send quite a bit of our aluminum to other domestic aluminum smelters. And the energy savings are quite honestly more along the lines of the countries that do a lot of mining. So if you think of Chile, Brazil, places where there's a lot of those minerals. I mean, that's where there's less need or demand for mining comes when you're actually doing and putting more of the recyclable material as inputs into the, making new material.
So, as we walked around the yard, I mean, there's some very interesting things people were doing that I noticed. And so you have this one gentleman that literally had a blowtorch out. So, of course, for my 9-year-old, that was the best thing ever. What was he doing?
Yeah, well, first he was avoiding Asher looking directly at the blowtorch, which would have been bad for your son and for our safety standards. So yeah, Khan, who was a longtime employee of ours, he was doing a great job. He's torching stainless steel. So we have a big pile, as you saw, of stainless steel there, and he is cutting it down to size. And why that is on a global basis, there is a language we speak that says, if it's going to meet this spec to be called stainless 304, or there's a specific term that is industry known, it has to be a certain size for it to actually meet that spec. And that size is determined by the smelter that is going to be working with that to melt it down. So we get the raw material, and it could be an old cage from the UW lab, in their basement, or it could be an old commercial kitchen unit. And we've got to cut it to size so it can be recycled. I mean, it sounds pretty rudimentary, but that's the value add that we're going to do at our processing facility to make sure it goes from the place where it's not being used anymore to where it can be made into new metal.
Mm-hmm. There was another area where you had these spools of look like different gauge wires, and it seemed like the hard part there was like extracting out and ripping the sheath off. I mean, what were those wires before they got there?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some pretty heavy duty wires. So, I mean, our infrastructure and underground or overhead has got obviously a lot of conductive copper wire. So we're working with companies like Puget Sound Energy, the various municipalities with their utility programs when they're doing a swap out of their infrastructure. And so we're getting oftentimes some either very old or wire, or sometimes it's the last segment of newer wire. And if it can be done, we will try and strip the insulation that's off the outside of the wire. That is still waste. That as of today is still a landfill item, and then the copper itself or the aluminum can be recycled. I like being able to control as much of the waste in the United States. Obviously, we have a higher standard for how we manage our waste. That isn't true globally. That still is not the case. And obviously, when it comes to recycling metals, one of the challenges that we still face as an industry is everywhere that items get exported, being done so in an environmentally friendly way. So, for example, I think you also saw on site some Christmas lights, right? We're just out of the holiday season, and people will bring Christmas lights to be recycled. They have copper in them, but it's a thin amount, and then there's all the green plastic that's on top of that. And the balance to be struck is it worth recycling for that copper, but you're going to have a trade-off of burning or getting that plastic to landfill. So I mean, that is the constant evolution of the scrap recycling industry, is how to stay economically viable, environmentally sustainable, and somewhere that has to meet in the middle for it to actually function.
As we walked around too, I also noticed that you had a gigantic box of cell phones. Did that come in one, or did people just randomly bring cell phones? Or does just one truck show up one day, and how many were in that box anyhow?
Well, for that answer, you have to come to our carnival that we have every year.
Count.
Yeah, you'll have to be part of our guessing. You win the whole box if you guess the number right.
You're gonna take this home. Congrats.
we will load it into your truck with a forklift. For us, rarely does an entire box or a package that we're going to sell come from one visit to us or one supplier of ours. It's accumulated over time. I would say with the box of cell phones you saw, that's not a product we see as much as. There are dedicated, specific electronics recyclers in the area that either pay a higher price for the goods or have a better process for recycling. We do get them as, part of the just being our doors being open, and we do have a home, and it will get recycled.
Yeah. Well, I think what prompted me to bring that up was kind of what you were saying is, cell phones particularly just have there's lots of different metals in cell phones, but it's also probably a big pain in the butt to try to extract all those out of every little cell phone. It's probably not even worth it.
Yeah, it's really, that's one where anecdotally I can't say specifically because I haven't seen where the breakdown of the recycling of a cell phone takes place. I can say that in talking with folks that are in the electronics world more specifically, especially when it comes to our smartphones and the glues and adhesives and the other what ends up being hazardous substances in the cell phones make them very difficult to break down. They are finding a home because there are the underlying valuable metals like precious metals that are in phones, et cetera. But they are hard to extricate from the way that a phone is made. Yeah. That's something as an industry that we have been trying to figure out is how to incentivize companies and manufacturers to make products much more with the end of life in mind. And we do an annual award for designing things to be recycled. But for a lot of manufacturers, the incentive isn't really there. It's about how cheaply can you make the product and get it out. And then industries like ours are left to figure out how can we do something with this so that it doesn't just all end up as trash.
Yeah, I think to that point, as the average consumer, I was trying to think of what effect can people really have on this particular industry. It seems like an industry that's been around for a long time. It sounds like as much as possible, people are finding ways to reuse a lot of this because it just makes economical sense. But of course, at some point, you're going to have that decision to make, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, are we spending more time polluting more to extract that little bit of metal out of this thing or not? In your opinion, like, what, if you fast forward this over the next few decades, do you think it's just, the industry stays kind of the way it is? I was just trying to scratch my head thinking, like, what could change to make it more efficient?
Yeah, so I think on the one hand, there's clearly not a global set of rules to abide by, and it's gotten better, right? A lot of our material, from an industry perspective, in the United States specifically, was going to China in the 90s, early 2000s, and that's really changed quite a bit. For one, China has looked internally a bit more for their own scrap metal needs to their own infrastructure to supply. But they have also, and I think rightly, realized that they had a big environmental issue. I mean, if you remember watching the Olympics a few years ago and the smog that they had, toxic environment that it looked like at the Beijing Olympics, it was awful. And so I think that they've made a realization that they had to have higher restrictions on how things get recycled. So the hope is that there will be more global understanding that you can't just do it the cheapest, fastest way, just like the things are made or designed. Recycling is the same way. You've got to strike a balance. At some point, there are things that, if we're going to make them, will make more sense just going to landfill than being recycled, because the benefit to the environment doesn't outweigh the detriment. However, it is still an economically driven industry, and that's why scrap metal recycling is still strong right now, and finding a home for the material. If you had any metal in your home that you wanted to recycle, you would find a place for it, but you couldn't say the same thing for plastic right now.
No.
That really did change in the last few years with countries that were taking the United States plastic waste and realizing, wait a minute, this doesn't make economic sense. And so I think the future is figuring out, if it does make sense to recycle it, but not economic sense, where is government going to step in and provide a subsidy or help facilitate that? A lot of the time right now, the recycling industry is kind of frowned upon or looked upon very much with the historical lens that we're still operating like a Sanford and Son junkyard. But there's some pretty sophisticated technology and very, I think, progressive thinking folks in the industry that really want to both do something great for our environment and have successful businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, back to the point on China, sometimes people say, well, this isn't my problem, it's China's problem. I said, look, it's your problem. It is your problem and not your problem. Like, you can't point to China anymore. China's the number one polluter on the planet. We're number two. But where do we get most of the goods? If I look in this room right now, where are most of them made? China. So, I've had a lot of debates with people about this, because they just kind of have sometimes this view of like, oh, it's too big of a problem, I don't want to deal with it, or it's China's problem. I'm like, you can't think that way. The economy is a global economy now. And like, sure, maybe 20, 30 years ago was way less, but that has changed so significantly.
Yeah.
And so I think that just adds to the challenge of climate change clearly, because, as you think about rules and regulations or things that the government can do, a lot of waste specifically is very regionalized. Like how we deal with waste disposal in Bellevue here versus where you live is probably different, right? And then you look to China, like, okay, it's different. The different countries are, so it just makes it way more challenging to get that many people aligned behind kind of a common goal. But that's why I'm optimistic about this is I see a lot more of it now than ever before. I see, way more investment in this space. I see smart people now getting into this versus 20, 30 years ago. It was like, oh, go have fun over there with your little hobby with climate change. And now it's real, and you've got dollars behind it and smart people behind it. So I'm confident you're going to have a lot of new things that are happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, along those lines, I think, I think one of the things that, and I don't know if I have enough optimism that it can happen, but when I think about the way goods move, just as you were saying, like, why do we have all of those goods from China in the room behind us and my kids' toys over here on the side that are luckily hidden from the camera's view right now. But, it becomes down to where could it be made cheaply. And so, the fact of the matter is when it comes to recycling, it's not a whole lot different. We have been a global industry for a long time, maybe longer than consumer goods has been a global industry to some degree. And I think that's where, as a country, rather than relying on the rest of the world to do the right thing, we could actually figure out how do we want to subsidize good, clean recycling in this country and make it easier for our industry, which has to pay the bills, has to employ our people, has to be able to make economic sense. But when it comes to some of those lower grade items like Christmas lights we were talking about earlier, if we can find a way to either subsidize or make sense for it to stay in the country as opposed to having to go overseas. But when it goes overseas, the problem is we know that the same regulations don't exist. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best outcome for the environment, but it's the only way to actually make things work for a company or an industry like ours. Is that we are not subsidized at all. If anything, it's quite the opposite. And so I think that's where the potential future is a realization by this country of realizing how valuable this industry is. And if we want to create a little bit more closed loop, we could actually do that and control more of where our goods go and that they stay in this country to be recycled as opposed to go somewhere else where we can't control how they're recycled.
Yeah, I always say it's kind of a sad state of affairs. It's easier for me to get an item delivered to my house from China than it is next door right now. That's the reality where we live right now. And, one of the reasons I started OfferUp was I remember it took me months, by the way, because everyone thought I was nuts. And I was like,
did you say it took you months?
Months before I actually was decided to do it. I think I went all in after like 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah. Took a lot longer to build all this. Years. But it's after the course of like 4 or 5 months, I just kept asking a lot of problems and I just kept thinking a lot about value and stuck around, where is value? I kept thinking like, where does all the Amazon stuff go? Where do all these things go? So I actually had this visual where I actually pulled up the US and you can look, they have this really cool chart that shows it looks like mountaintops and it's all based on population, right? So of course, LA and New York are like these huge peaks, right? And in my mind, when I saw that, I go, that's where all the value is. Like this, if you could easily because think about how many items people have. I'm like, okay, that is how. So as we thought about rolling out in these various markets, that's exactly what I did. I said, I want to go to LA. Like 30% of the adults in LA use OfferUp every single month now. It's kind of crazy. But I constantly am reminded of the value of local. You want to make less of an impact on the planet, do as much as you can locally. Now, practically, going back to the China example, that's not always that easy. If I just hit a button and something comes to my doorstep, okay, that's wonderful. But the byproduct of that is exactly what we're talking about, which is kind of this CO2 emission into the atmosphere. So I think that's always the rough balance because I'm pretty transparent and real with people. Like, look, if it takes more time or it costs more money, no one's going to do it, right? No one's going to do it. And so I think that's always the challenge. But you got to have everyone involved. You have the government, business, consumers. We all play some kind of role in this. And we can't always expect government to go do something so, but I think as consumers, if we're educated and aware of these things, we can create more pressure. And I think that's what the government needs. Like I was just reading last week, I forgot which politician was touting that they're spending $88 billion on climate change. I'm like, you need to be in the trillions. Like that's nothing. And so I think it's going to create we need just a lot more pressure and more inertia. I think behind this, and you can see it, looking out the window. I think that's the other big change from when we were younger. Like the extreme weather was not as extreme as it is now.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You and I both grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a very bizarre thing to not be able to plan August as the time you want to be outside. Now it's like, well, I may not be able to be outside because there's going to be all that wildfire smoke. I mean, that is just crazy.
That's the last 5 years, to your point. It's like the best time of year here in the Pacific Northwest. And you walk outside and it's had the worst some of the worst air quality on the planet.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if that's why it's easy to, toot that horn from here right now, is because we are just seeing it so clearly. But I do feel that others are seeing it. I don't know if they're putting their heads in the sand or not, but it seems to me that everything is just exacerbated in the last few years in terms of just wild swings. This is but a small part of what we can do. Obviously, our industry is doing this, can continue to do it. I think can continue to do it better. But it also takes partnership, because I think that the challenge for us in the future is it is going to continue to be places that shortcut, and where material goes, and the benefit to the environment isn't there, but we are reusing something. And I think consumers have proven to be really powerful in making corporate change, and so when it comes to design change, if consumers can unite around demanding better sustainable products, I don't think we get it, because it's too easy for us to just, if we don't know how to recycle, we can just throw it in the trash. We don't see the trash. There's lots of parts of the world that you've probably traveled to and I've traveled to where the trash is sitting in the river in the main town square. You see it. Yes. We are fortunate enough not to see it here, but it also makes it too easy to not to demand better. And it's our products, quite frankly, that are going around the globe, as are China's. And they just need to be better. They need to be better thought through.
To your point on visualization, again, one of my motivations for starting this channel was to just surface some of these things that I think, like you said, if it's too complex, I got to take care of the kids. I got something to do. I don't know. All right. And that I started this kind of on my own personal journey, trying to understand these things and just be more educated on how my own existence impact things. And it's fascinating. Like one of the things you mentioned around trash. So I'm not going to spoil my episode, but I'll send you a picture. I took a picture sitting in my family's trash on Saturday for a future episode, and I'll send it to you because I think
that's commitment. That's commitment.
Let's just say we had crap the previous week, and I had to keep the windows down in the truck on the way back. It was bad. But my point is, trash is incremental. You take that thing, you throw it in the trash. You don't pay attention. You don't think about it in the aggregate. And doing the shoot was really eye opening. And this will be a future episode, and you'll see it, and you're like, "Whoa, that's crazy." Individually in the U.S., you, me, every man, woman, and child will produce 120,000 pounds of trash in a lifetime, and that is just beyond crazy. And then if you recycled 99% of that would be one thing, but only 9% of all of our waste is recycled. So I think that's a thing that really concerns me a lot. And the other thing you mentioned about going to other countries and seeing this too, what I've also learned in this process was you worry a lot about the oceans and all the plastics in the oceans. And they have all the ocean cleanup, which I think is really important and great. But the vast majority of all that comes from the rivers, all the rivers, because we're all polluting and dumping in the rivers, and where all the rivers go, they end up going in the ocean. So I think I thought before that we were dumping so much trash in the oceans. By the way, New York used to do this in the 50s. They literally were just dumping trash into the Atlantic. But actually, it's Mother Nature doing what Mother Nature does, and the rivers are just sucking all this trash out, and it's all ending up into the oceans. And then we're eating it because we're eating fish and everything else. So, going back to the overall, we're one big planet, and I think that's always the challenge: is how do you get so many different people that have so many different interests aligned by this common goal? It's a big one.
Well, I think your origins and OfferUp have already done so much for reusing things that could have easily been reused for a long time and weren't, because it wasn't as easy as it is now to find a home. I think that is just incredible, and obviously as a user of it, it is game changing. And there's so much of our household goods are easily reusable. I think about what what we go through, especially as you're raising a young family, and the evolution of a child, how quickly they don't need something they needed just before. I mean, that's probably the heaviest consumption period, I feel like, of our life cycle, is just the clothes and the toys and the sporting goods that just
the
go.
Bikes and the skis. My son's had like 4 bikes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, OfferUp has changed the game on being able to reuse things like of that nature. It can be overwhelming, and I think your podcast is going to be great in terms of giving bite-sized examples of the different ways that we can do something. I mean, it is overwhelming, the problem we face, and there is no guarantee that we're going to find our way out of it in a successful fashion. But there's also an amazing amount of promise in how much of the stuff we use and we make is reusable, recyclable. I mean, it is also by luck that it happens to be that way, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be that metal can be remelted into new metal infinitely, like we talked about earlier. That is something we need to take advantage of. That is something that every beverage company should be thinking about when they make a choice to make something in a plastic bottle versus an aluminum can. And if I have my way, every drink I ever drink, water, soda, beer, whatever, should be out of an aluminum can. I mean, it's just an obvious no-brainer. So you start there.
Do you know about this company, Liquid Death?
I just saw it while I was in our little Packwood cabin this weekend, and someone had Liquid Death.
At first, I heard about this company more from their scale and how fast they had taken off. And I commended them back to the point, because globally we produce 500 billion plastic water bottles a year, with a B. It's one of the largest contributors to all the plastics in the oceans is our water bottles. And I'm like, anything you can do to minimize the usage of that, like a hydro flask or drinking, from Liquid Death, you should you should do it. Like drink from the aluminum can for sure.
Well, and plastic bottles are way less satisfying to step on and get down to a flat, and it just doesn't happen.
And the flavor, I noticed the flavor is not as good. Oh
yeah, everything tastes better out of an aluminum can. So there you go.
Wow.
I appreciate the opportunity to kind of just chat with you about this stuff. And obviously we're really proud of what we do. We've been doing it a long time, and I love the opportunity to let people know what the recycling industry is in terms of metal recycling specifically. It's extremely mature. It's been, improved upon, but at the same time, it's not a whole lot different than the company my great-grandfather started. And that is kind of a hopeful thing, because for me, it means we've been doing something pretty well for a long time in terms of finding a home for all the metals that are in our products. So I know that there's more we can do, and I think some of the things we talked about today could be a part of our future. But thanks for exploring it with me. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for being here, and I learned a lot. And again, thanks for letting my son and I kind of walk around and take a tour. Really, really interesting. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.